At a family BBQ, my dad announced in front of 40 neighbors that I should pay real rent or get out. What he didn't know was that 48 hours earlier, I'd bought my own house. He flipped the steak before he finished the sentence. That's the part that stays with me. The casual, practiced timing of it. The way my father Arthur delivered the most humiliating moment of my adult life with the same energy he used to announce dinner was ready. One hand on the tongs, one eye on the grill, 40 neighbors in lawn chairs with margaritas sweating in the July heat, and then his voice carrying across the entire backyard like he'd been waiting all afternoon for exactly this audience. "You're 24, he said. "Start paying market rent or pack your bags. This house isn't a charity ward for freeloaders." My stepmother Denise laughed into her drink. The specific laugh she reserved for moments when Arthur said something she'd clearly heard before. Practiced, appreciative, the laugh of a woman who had spent 6 years positioning herself as the audience for my father's performances rather than a participant in them. My half-brother Tyler, 19 years old and sitting in a camp chair he'd dragged out of my car without asking, popped a fresh beer like Dad had just delivered the punchline of the year, which from where Tyler was sitting, he had. I was standing by the condiment table with a paper plate in my hand. The plate had a hot dog on it that I had purchased, along with the buns, the chips, the coleslaw in the Costco container on the folding table, and the 12-pack in the cooler that Tyler was currently working through. I had purchased all of it because my father had texted me Wednesday morning and said, "Grabbing stuff for Sat BBQ, can you cover food this week? Little light on cash?" And I had said yes, automatically, the way I said yes to everything automatically, because 4 years of automatic yes had made it feel like a reflex rather than a choice. I looked at the paper plate. I looked at 40 neighbors studying the grass under their sandals, the way people study ground-level objects when they are witnessing something they are not sure how to witness. My knuckles were white around the plate's edge. Arthur flipped the steak. It sizzled. He didn't look at me. He never looked at me during these moments. That was the technique. The announcement was for the room, not for me. Looking at me would have made it a conversation. Not looking made it a verdict. I set the plate down on the condiment table. "You've been auto-drafting half my paycheck for 4 years, I said. My voice came out even, which surprised me. "I've been paying the bulk of your utility bills." Arthur did his theatrical shrug, the one he'd been doing my entire life. Shoulders up, palms out, the gesture of a man who finds accountability mildly amusing. "So what? Welcome to the real world. Don't like it? Find somewhere else?" Tyler chuckled. "Good luck with that in this economy, Maddie." I looked at Tyler. I looked at my father. I looked at 40 people who had come for potato salad and were getting something else entirely. "Fine," I said quietly. "Consider your wish granted." Arthur waved me off like a mosquito. What he did not know, what none of them knew, because I had spent 9 months making sure of it, was that 48 hours earlier, I had been handed the keys to my own house. Let me tell you who I was before I tell you who I became, because the distance between those two things is what this story is actually about. My name is Maddie Calloway. I'm 24 years old. I work as a logistics coordinator at a regional freight company in Dayton, Ohio, which sounds unglamorous and is, but which also pays $52,000 a year with overtime opportunities that I had been systematically exploiting for 8 months in ways that my father believed were mandatory training sessions. My mother left when I was 9. Not dramatically. She just became someone who lived in Phoenix and called on birthdays and sent gift cards at Christmas and loved me in the attenuated long-distance way of someone who has built a second life and doesn't have room for the full weight of the first one. I don't say that with bitterness. It's just accurate. My father Arthur remarried when I was 14. Denise was 41, tan, and had the specific energy of a woman who had decided that her personality was a performance and had committed fully to the role. She was not cruel to me exactly. She was indifferent in a way that had the same practical effect. I was furniture that occasionally needed to be moved. Tyler was their surprise. Born when I was 16, coddled in the way that late-in-life children are coddled by parents who have already raised one kid without enough resources and have decided to compensate for that with this one. By 19, he had been given a car he totaled, a laptop he sold, and a worldview that understood other people's labor as a resource available for his use. I moved back home at 20 after a lease fell through and a job offer in Columbus didn't come through, and I was temporarily, humiliatingly, out of options. Arthur offered me the spare room. He said I could stay until I got back on my feet. He said family took care of family. What he said and what he meant were two different things, which I understood within the first month when the small contribution to household expenses he'd mentioned became a direct deposit authorization I signed when I was stressed and moving boxes, and which turned into $100 a month coming out of my account before I saw it. Half my take-home at the time, withdrawn automatically on the first, framed as the responsible thing, the adult thing, the thing that proved I wasn't a burden. I was 20 years old. I signed where he pointed. Paperwork looks harmless when you're exhausted. Later, it looks like a locked door. The utilities came next, not through any direct ask, through the simpler mechanism of things not being paid. The electric bill would come up at dinner. Denise forgot to mail it, and I would pay it online because the alternative was the lights going out, the water bill, the internet, Arthur's truck insurance after a lapse that he described as a banking error, and I eventually realized was simply that no one had paid it. I kept a spreadsheet. By the third year, I was paying $100 in direct deposit plus an average of $680 a month in utilities and household expenses that cycled through my debit card like a slow leak I couldn't quite locate the source of. $1,180 a month on $52,000 a year. That is not a contribution. That is most of your life. The idea of leaving had lived in the back of my mind since year 2. The way ideas live when you're not ready to act on them. Present, but theoretical. The kind of plan you construct at 2 a.m. and talk yourself out of by morning. The reasons were always practical. The market, the down payment, the credit, the timing. The real reason was simpler and less flattering. I didn't believe I could do it without something going wrong. 4 years of being financially managed by someone else will do that to you. It erodes the specific confidence required to trust your own numbers. What changed was a Tuesday afternoon in October, 8 months before the barbecue. I was at work reviewing a freight contract when my colleague Jamie, 31, a homeowner since 28, the kind of person who brings spreadsheets to casual conversations, sat down across from me at lunch and said, with no preamble, "You make what I make. Why are you still at your dad's?" I started to explain. She cut me off. "What's your savings rate?" "About 12%. "Okay." After the household contribution, I told her the number. She looked at me for a moment. "Maddie, you're paying over $20,000 a year to live in someone else's house. Have you run the mortgage math?" I had not run the mortgage math. I had been paying someone else's utility bills for so long that I had stopped examining my own finances as a system and started experiencing them as a weather pattern, something that happened to me rather than something I was operating. Jamie pulled out her phone. We ran the numbers at the lunch table. What they showed me, clean and specific, on a calculator app on a Samsung Galaxy, was that I could afford a house. Not a large house, not a new house, not a house in a neighborhood that would impress anyone, but a house that was mine, with a mortgage payment that was less than what I was currently giving Arthur every month in a market where first-time buyer programs existed specifically for people in my income bracket. I drove home that night in my Honda Accord, and I sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then I went inside and I acted completely normal. And the next morning, I opened a bank account that Arthur did not know about. 9 months is a long time to keep a secret from someone you live with. The mechanics of it required a kind of constant, low-level vigilance that I have no romantic feelings about. It was exhausting and isolating, and there were nights when the effort of performing normalcy on top of everything else I was carrying felt like the thing that was going to break me. But it also required me, for the first time in 4 years, to look at my financial life as something I was building rather than something that was being extracted from me. And that shift, from passive to active, from managed to managing, turned out to be the most important thing I did in those 9 months. More important than the savings rate. More important than the credit score monitoring or the pre-approval process or the 47 houses I toured on weekends. I told Arthur I was at training sessions. The house I bought was a Craftsman on Alderman Street. White siding, wraparound porch, built in 1952, and updated enough to be functional and old enough to have character. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a maple tree and a wooden fence, a kitchen with a window over the sink that looked out at the neighbor's rose garden, $187,000. Fixed rate, monthly payment of $1,043, including escrow. Less than the auto draft. My mortgage broker was a woman named Carol Hines, 20 years in residential lending, who reviewed my file with the focused attention of someone who has seen enough to know what a clean application looks like and appreciated encountering one. She called me when the approval came through. "Congratulations," she said. "You qualified comfortably." I sat in my car in the work parking lot and I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel for a full minute. My realtor was David Park, 12 years in the Dayton market, who had the specific patience of someone who has worked with first-time buyers long enough to understand that the process feels bigger than it is, and that the job is partly real estate and partly helping people trust what the numbers are already telling them. He had sent me listings on Tuesday mornings for 6 months and never made me feel rushed or foolish for the ones I passed on. He was at the closing with a small potted plant and a card that said roots. I kept the plant on the kitchen windowsill. The BBQ was Saturday. The closing had been Thursday. I had the keys in my jacket pocket when my father made his announcement across the backyard. I could feel them there, a small, specific weight against my ribs, while he talked about the real world and freeloaders and market rent to 40 people eating food I'd eat for. I set the plate down. I said what I said. I went inside, went to my room, and I finished packing the last 2 boxes I had not yet been able to move without Arthur noticing. I had been doing it in stages for 3 weeks, 1 bag at a time, things that could be explained as laundry or gym gear or items going to donation, until the room contained only what I needed for the final trip. Sunday morning at 6:14 a.m., while the house was still quiet and Arthur's truck was still in the driveway, I loaded the last 2 boxes into the Accord. I did not leave a note. I sent 1 text from the end of the street after I'd driven far enough that I wouldn't hear any response before I was ready for it. Moved out. All household bills are now your responsibility. Then I drove to Alderman Street and I pulled into my own driveway and I sat there for a moment in the morning light with the maple tree doing its thing in the July warmth, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 4 years, like I could breathe all the way down. His call came 14 minutes later. I watched it ring. Then I opened my laptop on the kitchen counter, the kitchen with the window over the sink, and I went through the accounts I had been managing for 4 years. Power. Account holder. Arthur R. Calloway. Authorized third-party payer. Madison Calloway. Remove third-party authorization. Confirm. Water. Same structure. Remove. Confirm. Internet. Remove. Confirm. Auto insurance. My own policy had always been separate, but I had been added as a payer on Arthur's policy because his credit card had declined during a renewal 2 years ago, and he'd asked me to cover it just this month, which had become every month. Remove vehicles B and C from payment authorization. Confirm. Each confirmation email landed in my inbox with the specific satisfaction of a sound I hadn't known I'd been waiting to hear. By noon, the calls had progressed from Arthur's number to Denise's number to Tyler's number and back to Arthur's, in a rotation that my phone logged with the impartiality of a system that doesn't care about family dynamics. By 5 o'clock, Arthur's truck was in my cul-de-sac. I saw it from the kitchen window. I walked to the front door and opened it and stepped onto the wraparound porch, and I looked at my father standing in the street looking up at my house with the expression of a man whose model of reality has just been substantially revised. He looked smaller outside of his own context. That was the first thing I noticed. Arthur in his backyard. Arthur at his kitchen table. Arthur with his tongs at the grill. That Arthur occupied space with the specific confidence of a man on his own territory. Arthur standing in someone else's cul-de-sac looking up at a house he hadn't known existed was a different person entirely. You cannot possibly be serious, he said. You gave me an ultimatum, I said. I chose out, and my wallet came with me. He stared at the porch, at the siding, at the maple tree in the yard, and the fence, and the specific realness of a house that belonged to someone who was not him. How did you get off my property? I said. I went inside and threw the deadbolt. I stood in my kitchen with my back against the door and my heart going about twice its normal rate, and I listened to the sound of his truck idling in the street, and then the sound of it driving away, and then the sound of my own house being quiet. My house. Quiet. The fraud alert came at 11:47 p.m. I had been asleep for an hour when my phone lit up with a notification from my bank's security system, a failed login attempt on my primary checking account. I sat up, unlocked my phone, and read the message twice. Failed login, 11:31 p.m. IP address, unrecognized. Failed login, 11:34 p.m. IP address, same. Failed login, 11:39 p.m. IP address, same. I sat with that for a moment, and I opened the credit monitoring app I'd been running for 8 months as part of the general housekeeping of building a clean financial profile for the mortgage application. There was a new account, a credit card, opened 3 weeks ago in my name at an issuer I had never done business with. Credit limit, $4,500. Current balance, $3,847. I had not applied for this card. I sat in my bedroom in my own house at midnight, and I looked at that balance, and I felt my mind do the thing it does when two pieces of information that have been separate suddenly connect. Not a thought, exactly. A click. My purse. 8 months ago, my purse had disappeared from the kitchen counter for 4 hours. I'd looked everywhere, found it under a couch cushion, assumed I'd put it there, moved on. My wallet had been in my purse. My social security card had been in the back pocket of my wallet because I'd needed it for a form at work and had been lazy about returning it to the filing cabinet where it lived. Tyler, who was 19 and had no income and had been handed a car he totaled and a laptop he sold, and a worldview that understood other people's resources as available for use. Tyler, who had chuckled at the barbecue and said, "Good luck with that in this economy, Maddie," while drinking beer I had purchased with money he had apparently been supplementing with a credit card opened in my name. My hands were not shaking. I want to be precise about that because the absence of trembling was itself information. What I felt was not panic. It was the cold, specific clarity of someone who has just understood the full shape of a situation and is now deciding what to do with the understanding. I got out of bed, I made coffee, I opened my laptop. The next 3 hours were documentation. I called my bank's fraud line and spoke to a representative named Marcus, who walked me through the process of flagging the account and freezing my credit with all 3 bureaus. He was calm and methodical and had the specific manner of someone who has handled enough of these calls to be past sympathy and into competence, which was exactly what I needed. "Do you have a suspect?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Family member. Minor." A pause. "We'll need you to file a police report to initiate the fraud investigation. You can reference the case number I'm going to give you." He gave me the case number. I wrote it on a post-it and stuck it to the corner of my monitor. I called the credit card company and reported the fraudulent account. They flagged it, suspended it, and told me the dispute process would take 7 to 10 business days. Then I printed everything. The bank's login attempt logs with timestamps and IP addresses. The credit card's fraudulent statement, itemized, gas, fast food, a pair of Air Jordans from a sneaker site, what appeared to be multiple transactions at a gaming supply store, the fraud alert from the monitoring app, the bank representative's case number, and the notes from the call. I found a manila folder in the box of office supplies I'd moved. I slid everything into it. On the front of the folder, in a Sharpie, I wrote one word: boundaries. Then I went to the kitchen for more coffee, and on the way back I found the stack of forwarded mail from my old address that the postal service had sent to the new house. I'd filed a change of address the week before closing, which meant mail that had arrived in the last week at Arthur's house had been forwarded here. Most of it was routine. One piece was not. Red ink, bold capital letters across the top, notice of default, 60 days past due, public auction date set, Arthur's mortgage company, 2 missed payments, a public auction date set for 63 days from the notice date, which was stamped 3 weeks ago, 40 days. I stood in my kitchen with the notice in my hand and I felt the old response trying to activate, the flood of adrenaline that came with family financial crisis, the immediate mobilization toward rescue, the reflexive calculation of what I would need to liquidate from my own savings to prevent this. I had felt that response dozens of times over 4 years. Every missed utility bill, every declined card, every just this month. I felt it try to start up, and then I felt it stop. Not because I was being cruel, because I understood. Holding that notice in the kitchen of a house I had bought with the money I'd been quietly saving instead of giving away, that rescuing Arthur from the consequences of 2 missed mortgage payments was not love. It was enabling, and I was done enabling. I made a photocopy on the small printer I'd set up in the second bedroom. I slid the copy into the manila folder. I put the folder on the kitchen table. Then I went to bed. They came on Sunday morning. All 3. Arthur in front, Denise behind him with her arms crossed, Tyler in the back with his hands in his hoodie pocket and the specific hunched posture of someone who already knows the conversation is not going to go his way. The rain had been falling since 6. The kind of steady gray Sunday rain that makes everything look more serious than it might otherwise otherwise. I was already up. I'd been up since 7, and I'd spent the morning on 2 calls. The first was with Detective Sandra Reyes of the Dayton Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. 14 years on the force, 8 of them in fraud investigation. A woman who had the brisk, information-focused manner of someone who moves through a lot of cases and has learned to extract what's relevant quickly. I'd called the non-emergency line and been transferred to her after explaining the nature of the complaint. She took the details: the failed logins, the fraudulent card, Tyler's age, which she noted, my case number from the bank. With a minor involved, the process is slightly different, she said. But identity fraud is identity fraud regardless of age. Can you come in Monday morning with your documentation? Yes, I said. Bring everything you have. Printed is fine. If you have the original statements, bring those too. The second call was to my bank's fraud department for a follow-up, and the third was to a number I'd saved in my phone 6 months ago and never used. Aaron Cho, JD, a consumer protection and fraud attorney I'd found while researching the mortgage process, and who had been recommended by Carol Hines as someone worth having in your contact list just in case. Aaron picked up on the 4th ring, which was impressive for a Sunday morning. I explained the situation in the compact, sequential way I'd been practicing in my head since 2 a.m. She was quiet for a moment. The fraudulent account opened in your name. Do you have documentation that it was opened without your knowledge or authorization? Bank confirmation, credit monitoring alert, and the account statement showing charges at locations I've never been to. Do you have reason to believe the minor had access to your identifying information? My purse went missing for 4 hours approximately 8 months ago. My social security card was in my wallet. Another pause. Okay, this is workable. Call me Monday after your police appointment and we'll discuss civil remedies. I heard them on the porch at 9:47 a.m. I picked up the manila folder. I walked to the front door. I stepped onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me. Arthur skipped hello. You saw the notice. Wire money and fix this. Not, I'm sorry about the barbecue. Not, I should have handled that differently. Not, how are you? How is the house? Can we talk? Just fix this. No, I said. You are still family. His voice went up the way it did when he wanted the performance to be louder than the argument, projecting the way he projected across the backyard on Saturday so that the street, the neighbors, whatever audience was available would register the intensity of his position. The rain continued. Family doesn't drain its kids and call it a contribution, I said. Family doesn't humiliate you in front of 40 people while you're serving their food. And family doesn't commit federal identity fraud in your name. I looked directly at Tyler. His hands came out of his hoodie pocket. His face did something I had not seen it do before. Not the smirk, not the chuckle, not the casual borrowed confidence of a 19-year-old who has never been held accountable for anything. Something younger and more frightened than all of that. The smirk was gone. Just gone. Arthur stepped forward. His voice dropped to the register he used when he wanted to signal that this was serious, that the performance was over and what followed was real. The tone he'd used since I was 12 when he wanted me to understand that the ground could shift under me if he decided it should. Walk away and let the bank take that house, he said, and you are dead to this family. 4 years ago, that sentence would have dismantled me. 2 years ago, it would have at least made my hands shake. Even 6 months ago, in the early weeks of the secret savings account, it would have landed somewhere tender. Standing on my porch in the Sunday rain, I felt it land, and then I felt something break loose in my chest that was not pain and not grief, but was the specific sensation of weight releasing. The weight you carry for so long that you forget it's not part of your body until the moment it's gone. Then I'll gladly be dead to you, I said, because it means I'll finally be everything to myself. I opened the folder. I held up both documents, the fraud documentation on top, the foreclosure notice below, so that all 3 of them could see exactly what I was holding. The red ink, the bold capital letters, the case number from Detective Reyes, the timestamp of the failed login attempts. I let them see it for 3 full seconds. Then I let go. The papers floated down through the rain and landed at Arthur's boots. I went inside. I threw the deadbolt. Through the blinds, I watched them. Arthur bent down and picked up the foreclosure notice. He read it standing in the rain, water soaking into his shirt, and I watched his face go through the stages of understanding that a document produces when it is both real and specifically bad. Denise had her phone out. I couldn't see what she was looking at, but her posture told me she was reading something that was confirming rather than contradicting what she'd just been shown. Tyler was staring at the fraud documentation that had landed nearest him. He stood over it without picking it up, looking down at it with the expression of a 19-year-old who has just understood that the thing he'd been doing casually had a name, and that the name had federal implications, and that the person he'd done it to had already called a detective. He nudged it with his sneaker, looked at his father. His father did not look back. They stood in the rain in my cul-de-sac for 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I counted. Then they walked back to Arthur's truck and got in and drove away. They did not knock again. Detective Reyes took my statement Monday morning at 8:15 a.m. She reviewed the documentation folder with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who knows exactly what she's looking for. The login attempts, the IP logs, the fraudulent statements, the timeline of the purse disappearing, Tyler's age, his residence at the family address, his access to spaces where my purse had been left. The digital trail is clean, she said. The IP from the login attempts matches a device registered at your father's address. The purchases on the fraudulent card are geographically consistent with that location. What happens now? We'll interview him. His age makes this a juvenile matter initially, but depending on the amount and the circumstances, the DA has discretion. She looked at me directly. You know this is going to create some family difficulty. There's no family to create difficulty in, I said. He can have the consequences. I'll take the credit score repair. She nodded once. The nod of someone someone who has sat across from enough people in enough similar situations to understand that family is not always a reason to absorb a crime. Erin Cho and I met that afternoon. She reviewed the same documentation and confirmed that the civil remedies available to me were real and substantial, that the fraudulent account, the charges, and the demonstrated identity theft gave me standing to pursue recovery through civil court regardless of what the criminal process produced. The minor status complicates the criminal side, she said. It does not complicate the civil side as dramatically. Your father, as the parent of a minor living in his household, has exposure here too. I thought about that. Let the process work, I said. I want it on record. I want him to understand what the record looks like, that I can help with, she said. The foreclosure, I later learned from a mutual family acquaintance who called me 6 weeks after the barbecue with a specific nervous energy of someone delivering information they're not sure they should be delivering, was resolved, not by me, by my Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister who had been at the barbecue, who had studied the grass under her sandals during Arthur's announcement, and who had, apparently, been doing some math of her own in the weeks since. She covered 1 month's payment to stop the auction clock, with conditions. Arthur had to list the house within 90 days. The family home I'd grown up in, the one I'd been paying utilities on for 4 years, the one where Tyler had used my social security number to open a credit card while I was making lunch, was going on the market. I found out about this on a Thursday evening. I sat with it for a while. I did not feel satisfaction exactly. I keep coming back to that. The absence of the clean, hot feeling that stories like this are supposed to produce. What I felt was more like the specific relief of a system finally operating the way it was designed to. Cause, effect, consequence arriving at the correct address. Arthur had called me a freeloader in front of 40 people. It turned out I had been the only thing keeping the lights on. Tyler was interviewed by Detective Reyes in October, with a public defender present and Arthur sitting in the waiting room. The fraudulent accounts charges, 3,847 over 6 weeks, were documented, disputed through the credit card company's fraud process, and ultimately removed from my credit profile after a 40-day investigation. Tyler entered a juvenile diversion program in November. No criminal record if he completed it. Community service. Restitution structured over 18 months. The restitution checks arrive on the 15th. He has not missed one. I don't know if that means he's learned something, or if it means he has adequate supervision for the first time in his life. I've stopped trying to determine the difference. My house on Alderman Street is exactly what it looked like the day I closed. White siding, wraparound porch, the maple tree in the backyard doing what maples do in October, which is put on the most theatrical display possible and then drop everything all at once. I have a small herb garden on the kitchen windowsill. I have a secondhand couch from the Facebook marketplace that is more comfortable than anything I sat on in 4 years at Arthur's house. I have a mortgage payment that is $57 less than the auto draft that used to leave my account before I saw it. My father has not called since October. I have not called him. The relationship we had was not, I've come to understand with the help of a therapist named Dr. Kim Andrews. 8 years in family systems therapy, a woman who listens without performing and asks questions that land somewhere below the question itself. The relationship I thought it was. What I thought was family was a system in which I was the load-bearing member, not a participant. A system that functioned by my labor and called that labor love. What do you miss? Dr. Andrews asked me in our 3rd session. I thought about it honestly. The idea of it, I said, not the actual thing. She nodded. That's a grief, she said, and it's allowed to be one. I let it be one. I also let it be finished.